That's right. Even if you try to trouble us, it's not like your funds can hurt us. We don't need poor people with low-class backgrounds. I sighed and made one last check. Shall I close your account? Go ahead. His tone was mocking. The smirk on his face and the way he stared at us were clearly condescending. People who judge others by their background need to learn a little lesson. I thought this as I smiled. My name is Emily, and I'm a 29-year-old office worker. Currently, I live peacefully with my mother while working. My father passed away from illness when I was young. His chronic illness worsened at a young age. My father, who managed various businesses, was always busy and often left early in the morning and returned late at night. Yet, he valued our family, and I have fond memories of playing with him on his days off. My mother and I were initially shocked by his death. But my mother ensured I didn't feel lonely and cherished our time together. Fortunately, when my father was diagnosed, he involved his predecessor and made sure we had enough funds to live comfortably. Thanks to this, I was able to go to university, and both my paternal and maternal grandparents supported us greatly. Especially my paternal grandparents, who lived nearby, took good care of me when my mother was working or away. We still visit both sets of grandparents for holidays and spend time together. I am who I am today because of the support from so many people. To repay their kindness, I applied to a public university and got a job at a major company. I had considered working at the bank my father was supposed to inherit, but he told me, "Do what you love. The bank is already taken care of. So you don't need to worry about it," allowing me to pursue my passion. With a fulfilling home environment and the ability to fully engage in my hobbies, I had little interest in romance. However, as I got older, many of my friends around me got married and had children. This made me start thinking about marriage, and that led to a significant encounter. Little did I think that this encounter would turn into a big event. "Hey, Emily, are you interested in romance?" "What?" It all started with a question from a colleague. We've been close since we joined the company as new graduates. There's someone I know who hasn't had much luck in relationships. He's well-educated and good-looking. I thought you two might hit it off since you're also well-educated. Really? I've thought this for a while, but it's such a shame that someone as accomplished as you isn't in a relationship. There are a few people in the office who have their eyes on you, too. My friend has a wide network and always shares stories about different people. She lives with her boyfriend, whom she met at a group dating event, and seems very happy. She often worries about my lack of romantic experiences. Since I had discussed marriage with her before, I decided to give it a try. A few days later, I was set to meet a man named Andrew. The meeting place was a cafe. Feeling nervous, I waited until a man approached me. "Emily?" "Ah, yes. Nice to meet you. Are you Andrew?" "Yes, pleased to meet you." Andrew's expression was blank as he looked at me. He glanced at me from head to toe. It felt like he was appraising me, which made me feel a bit uneasy. He then sat down across from me and immediately spoke. "What do you do for work, Emily?" "Oh, I work in sales at a company. I've always enjoyed interacting with people and using my opinions to help others, so I work in sales. It's fulfilling, and I love the moments when customers buy what I recommend and tell me with a smile how happy they are." "And what's the name of your company?" Brighton Corporation." At my response, Andrew paused and finally smiled. But it was a smug smile, not one that left a good impression. Brighton Corporation is a fairly large company. Our performance is solid. I believe our products are well trusted by our customers. Since he had asked, I decided to return the favor and ask him a question. "What do you do for work, Andrew?" With a smug expression, Andrew began to boast. "I work at Sunrise Bank, and I'm a department manager there." Sunrise is a huge bank. The work is complicated and not something an ordinary person can handle. But my father is the president there, so as his heir, I'm on a different level from ordinary people. Andrew's words made me feel uneasy. I had expected a normal answer, but his response was strangely prickly, making me uncomfortable. Sunrise Bank is indeed a major bank. I knew about it for specific reasons, but I hadn't expected Andrew to be a department manager there, so I was surprised. Wow, that's impressive. Sunrise Bank is a big place. I decided to flatter him. There was no need to be rude, and although I thought this would be the last time we'd meet, it was better than showing any negative attitude. Andrew seemed pleased with my flattery and continued to boast about himself. Honestly, it was painful to listen to. He occasionally listened to my stories, but would always steer the conversation back to himself, often saying outrageous things about his lack of suitable partners. I get a lot of attention, but people who approach me usually don't match my family background or education. I thought to myself that it might be a personality issue, but I assumed I wouldn't meet him again, so I didn't worry much. However, as time passed, he seemed satisfied and made a proposal. I would like to meet your parents, Emily. What? But we just met today. That's why. It's important to know about your parents' excellence if we're going to continue seeing each other, right? No way, I have no intention of dating him. I screamed internally. But he continued talking as if he didn't notice my reaction at all. Do you have any days when you and your parents are available? Well, I'll have to check with my mother. What about your father? I was put off by how intrusive he was, but I couldn't back out of the conversation. Oh, my father passed away when I was young. At my words, Andrew's eyes narrowed suddenly. He responded with a simple "I see," and fell silent, seemingly deep in thought. Well, let me know later when you have a date. We'll arrange it. Actually, looking forward to it. Shall we go? Andrew stood up before I could finish my sentence. It felt like talking to someone from a completely different world. I really didn't want to see him again, but he had my contact information and had already mentioned meeting my parents. I was also troubled by the disdainful look in his eyes when I mentioned my father's death. In the end, I was coerced into arranging a meeting with our parents next time. When I explained this to my mother, she smiled wryly and said, "Maybe he was just nervous because he hasn't had many opportunities for connections." Nervous or not, his manner was off. His way of speaking was strange. But his parents will be there, right? If it doesn't work out, you can just say no. I'll be there too. Yeah, thanks, Mom. I'm sorry for involving you in this. When I apologized, feeling guilty, my mother laughed cheerfully. It's okay. You don't need to feel bad about it. Besides, I'm curious about Sunrise Bank too. Let's see how it goes. And so, Andrew and I arranged a meeting with our families. At that time, I had no idea that Andrew had set this up for a specific reason. On the appointed day, we arrived at the location Andrew had specified. It was a high-end restaurant, judging by its appearance. It's quite a place. Yeah, it is. Inside, our table was ready, but Andrew hadn't arrived yet. We sat and waited, and Andrew's family arrived a bit late. Sorry, the traffic was terrible, Andrew said. Nice to meet you, thank you for coming. Andrew's family sat down without any sign of apology. I was irritated, but I didn't want to start a confrontation, so we began the introductions. After some time, Andrew's mother smirked and spoke. So, where is your father? Is he running late? What? I looked at Andrew. He smirked but said nothing. I'm sure I had told him that my father had passed away. I told him about it, and he expressed a desire for a family gathering, but despite knowing this, Andrew's mother acted as if she was unaware. My mother quickly responded on my behalf. My husband passed away when Emily was young. That's why I'm here with her today. My mother smiled gently. Andrew's mother raised her voice exaggeratedly. Oh my. Emily is from a single-parent family? Her words made my eyes widen. Even though I said my father had died of illness, her tone was clearly malicious. It must have been tough, growing up with just one parent. But she did graduate from a public university. That's respectable, right? Really? But still, being from a single-parent family, won't that cause problems? Andrew's family's conversation left my mother and me in shock. How could they talk like that with us right in front of us? They were belittling us, as if being from a single-parent family was a flaw. That's not something you say to someone you've just met. I felt anger rising and responded in a low voice. Excuse me, but my mother raised me with great care after my father passed away. I am who I am today thanks to her. And it's incredibly rude to speak about someone like that when you just met them. Emily. But Andrew's mother just laughed. Rude? Isn't it more rude for a girl from a single-parent family to try and marry into a prestigious family? Strong-willed women aren't really my type, Andrew added. This was pointless. I watched the three of them in disbelief. I had high hopes since you work for Brighton Corporation. But maybe someone like you isn't fit for someone who will inherit Sunrise Bank. The insults kept coming. I no longer cared to listen, but we didn't deserve such treatment. As my fists trembled with anger, my mother glared at the three of them. Did you invite us here just to look down on us? I've heard about what happened from Emily. Are you enjoying mocking us because we come from a single-parent family? It was the first time I had heard my mother speak in such a low voice. Stop making accusations. We were just teasing a bit, weren't we? No one enjoys being teased. And all your remarks have been nothing but insults. We're not going to sit here and listen to you mock us. When my mother firmly stated this, Andrew's family looked displeased. Just commoners, they sneered. Commoners? Maybe so, but today has made up my mind, my mother replied. Andrew's family looked momentarily bewildered by my mother's words, but they soon began to laugh derisively. Their expressions clearly said, "What can you possibly do?" My mother sighed and then spoke. It turns out we have funds deposited with your bank. But knowing there are people like you there, I don't feel comfortable leaving it with you. Oh. Really? But I don't recognize the name Nancy, so it must not be a large account. It can't be that significant. That's right. Even if you try to trouble us, it's not like your funds can hurt us. We don't need poor people with low-class backgrounds. I realized they had just squandered their last chance for redemption. But they continued with their insults, unaware. I sighed and made one last check. Shall I close the account? Go ahead. Their tone was mocking. Andrew's family stared at us with obvious smirks on their faces. People who judge others by their background deserve a lesson. I smiled as I thought this. Very well. We will proceed as you wish, and let's consider this meeting over. Of course, we had no intention of letting a single-parent child marry into our family. Very well, we shall take our leave then. My mother and I stood up. Oh, don't worry about the bill today. It's too expensive for you, isn't it? Very well, then. And with that, our meeting ended. Later, I made a phone call. A few weeks later, I started receiving a barrage of messages from Andrew. It was all expected and entirely their fault, so I didn't answer any of them. I immediately blocked his contact. A few days later, my grandfather called. He summoned my mother and me to Sunrise Bank. In the meeting room, we found Andrew's family, their faces pale. As soon as they saw us, Andrew's mother stood up and rushed over, bowing deeply. We deeply apologize for the trouble we've caused, she exclaimed. Without responding to her apology, I smiled and spoke. What exactly are you apologizing for? Andrew's mother bit her lip and clenched her fists, trembling. And rightly so. There were too many things they needed to apologize for. Knowing this likely adds to their frustration. The reason for all this was tied to the fact that I had mentioned closing our account that day. Of course, our personal accounts didn't hold significant amounts. Closing those accounts wouldn't cause much damage. But my grandfather was different. He had been managing my father's inheritance for us at Sunrise Bank. And my grandfather also had his own accounts there. If we closed all of his accounts and the inheritance accounts, the total amount would be around $70 million. So, by mocking us, they sealed our decision to close those accounts. Moreover, my grandfather was the former president of this bank. My father was supposed to inherit the bank, but when he passed away young, the position was given to Andrew's father. I didn't know. I had no idea Emily was related to the former president. Andrew's father pleaded, his eyes darting nervously. But it didn't matter. Even if they didn't know, their prejudice against our family remained. That prejudice led to this situation, so it was their own fault. Are you saying you would have treated us differently if we were relatives? Hey, don't talk to my father like that. It's your fault for not telling us about your grandfather from the start, Andrew retorted. I had no obligation to tell you about my family. Besides, you were the ones who moved things forward and insulted us. Do you forget that? Andrew's eyes narrowed with frustration, unable to respond to my words. You all insulted us when you found out I was from a single-parent family. We decided to move our funds because we couldn't trust a bank run by people like you. And you agreed to it. We're just following through. Yeah, but for such a trivial reason. It might be trivial to you, but have you ever considered how it feels to have your family insulted? Silence fell over the room. Andrew's mother was trembling, looking like she had given up, and his father hung his head. But Andrew still seemed unable to accept the situation. His face was filled with blatant dissatisfaction. You get all high and mighty just because we tried to talk to you, Andrew muttered. Andrew showed no signs of remorse. The moment he muttered those words, the meeting room door opened. There stood my grandfather. Seeing him, Andrew's parents turned even paler and froze in place. Only Andrew continued to glare at me. My granddaughter gave you a chance to reconsider your behavior, but it seems you only care about yourselves, my grandfather said. Sir. This woman is lying. Mind your tongue. If you say any more, you'll find yourself in an even worse situation, my grandfather warned. Andrew, rendered speechless by my grandfather's words, continued to glare at me. Then, as if something snapped, he shouted. No way. How was I supposed to know a single-parent family would be related to the former president? And then you come here to mock me. Knowing I'm the future president. Andrew. Be quiet. My grandfather glared harshly at Andrew, who was breathing heavily. Under my grandfather's intense gaze, Andrew seemed to flinch slightly. Future president, huh? My grandfather said, turning his gaze to Andrew's father. Andrew's father wilted under my grandfather's stare. I understand wanting to pass on the position to your son. But seeing his attitude, it's clear you can't continue as president. My grandfather stated. No. Not over something like this. Andrew's father protested but sat back down under my grandfather's gaze. The fact that you think it's just something like this is the problem. However, I'm retired, so the decision will be left to the board. If you have something to say it to them, my grandfather said. We have recorded both the previous conversation and this one. Don't forget that this recorder will serve as evidence. I took out the voice recorder in front of the three of them and pressed the play button. The recorder played back the conversation from the other day. You had that prepared? That's unfair. Andrew exclaimed. I prepared it just in case, but remember, you created the situation that made it necessary, I replied. Even Andrew had no retort, and as the three of them turned pale, my grandfather said, Thank you, we'll handle it from here. Signaling my mother and me to leave. Afterward, my grandfather didn't move the funds, at least not officially. Andrew's father was removed from his position as president, and Andrew was demoted. Unable to bear the loss of his pride, Andrew eventually resigned. However, my grandfather made sure that finding a new job in the same industry would be extremely difficult for him. Whether he knew it or not, Andrew's father intended to stay until retirement. But my grandfather mentioned it would be tough both mentally and physically. Andrew's mother, who once had influence as the president's wife, started working part-time to maintain their lifestyle. However, her personality made it difficult for her to hold a job. I'm really sorry. It's okay, you didn't know, right? I only shared the aftermath of the incident with the friend who introduced me to Andrew. She wasn't at fault, she only knew about Andrew through an acquaintance. My mother worried about being a single parent, but I told her I'm happy now and grateful for the support from those around me. When I told her that, she laughed and said, Thank you. My grandfather, who handled everything, also invited me to visit and relax at his house. I am truly grateful for my grandfather's help in this matter. It was a tough ordeal, but I'm happy now, so it's all good. I have some good news for you. Oh no, not another romance? This time, it's a friend of my boyfriend's. It'll be fine, I promise. Though I'm not keen on diving into another romantic adventure just yet. I'm content with my current life and want to continue valuing the people who support me. And someday, I hope to meet someone I truly connect with.